Hey everyone, make sure to subscribe to the channel before we dive in. This story is going to take you deep into betrayal, family tension, and a revenge that simmers quietly for years. The clock on my bedside table glowed 12:53 a.m., the digits sharp in the dark room. My phone buzzed again, and I saw her post, "Living my best life." It was a photo of her laughing, drink in hand, city lights blurred behind her, perfectly staged, perfectly designed to hurt. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I typed my comment, calm, precise. Without your husband, apparently. Vienna sleeps late in the winter, a city of fog and muted streetlights. The Danube, a silver ribbon snaking through deserted streets. I tossed the phone onto the bed and stared at the ceiling. My chest tightened, not with rage, exactly, but with the slow burn of betrayal. Her name was Elizabeth, my wife for 10 years, mother of our 2 children. From the outside, our life looked perfect. A tasteful apartment near the Prater, expensive coffees on lazy Sundays, vacations in Tuscany. But behind closed doors, the cracks had grown wide, gnawed at by secrets, resentment, and what I had once thought was my own failure to keep her happy. It had started subtly. Late nights at work events, texts she claimed were from colleagues, invitations I wasn't supposed to see. The little lies, the excuses, the way she smiled when she thought I wouldn't notice. At first I blamed myself. Maybe I had grown dull, maybe I wasn't enough. But one night, months ago, I found the messages. Clear, explicit, not just flirtation, plans, laughter, intimacy. My wife, my partner, my home, was slowly erasing me from her life, while pretending everything was fine. I didn't confront her immediately. I didn't call her out at the restaurant or in front of friends. I watched. I listened. I learned. The psychological advantage is always with the one who can endure the deception quietly, observe, and wait. Elizabeth had a pattern. She had her nights out, her little escapes into a world where she could pretend we didn't exist. She had a favorite bar, a group of friends who didn't ask questions, and a man she thought was invisible, because I allowed him to be. Every detail, every routine, I memorized. The drivers she used, the table she always sat at, the way she laughed when she believed nobody knew. I planned meticulously. It wasn't about anger, it was about precision. Every step calculated, every move strategic. I began with a subtle undermining. A friend sent her a coincidental message that hinted someone knew her secrets. A colleague noticed a missing invoice from her work account, prompting a mild investigation. Every action seemed unrelated, disconnected, natural. But the threads I wove were invisible, and soon they began to entangle her. She noticed me less and less at home. I played the role of the distracted husband perfectly. Polite, calm, almost gentle. My children adored me. My daughter's laughter was my only solace. My son clung to my side, unaware of the silent war unfolding. Elizabeth assumed I was distracted by work. She underestimated my patience. I hired an investigator discreetly, not for spying exactly, but to map her routines, her connections, her financial footprints. I collected evidence slowly, leaving no gaps. And everything she thought private, her texts, emails, transactions, became part of the architecture of her eventual undoing. Winter deepened. The snow blanketed the city, muffling the chaos that would soon erupt. I started planting seeds. Emails, calls, subtle nudges to colleagues, friends, even distant relatives. They all received carefully tailored information, framed innocently, yet precise enough to undermine her credibility. And then, the night came. She had planned another girls' night out. I didn't call. I didn't text. I let her post, laughing and carefree. By 12:53 a.m., the first strike landed. My comment. Calm, public, unmistakable. Without your husband, apparently. The chaos unfolded slowly, the way an avalanche begins at the top of a mountain. Friends and family began to notice patterns she had assumed were invisible. All colleagues whispered. Her social circle questioned her loyalty, her reliability. The man she had been seeing grew distant once subtle hints of exposure reached him. Her carefully constructed web began to unravel. At home, I maintained silence. I played the loving father, the concerned husband, the attentive partner. Elizabeth tried to engage me, her usual smirk, her casual excuses. But I was detached, almost untouchable. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, became evidence of her own duplicity. One evening, in late February, I confronted her indirectly. The children were asleep. She leaned against the counter, a glass of wine in hand, her expression smug, almost daring. "Why are you so distant lately?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Maybe I've just been noticing things," I said, leaving it vague. Enough to unsettle, and not enough to explain. The following days were a blur of revelations for her. Emails she assumed were private leaked to work associates. Friends questioned her honesty. Colleagues doubted her professionalism. She began to panic, her carefully curated life crumbling under the weight of invisible forces she couldn't identify. And through it all, I remained calm, composed, the eye of the storm she had created. By March, her breakdown was undeniable. She came home late one night, eyes red, shoulders slumped. I greeted her with a quiet calm. "Is it all falling apart?" I asked. She didn't answer. She only stared at me, finally seeing me, not the man she had ignored, but the one who had waited, watched, and finally acted. I offered her a choice: transparency, honesty, therapy, or continued exposure and public unraveling. She chose the former, desperate to salvage what remained of her dignity, what remained of our fragile family. Even then, the consequences were irreversible. Friends and colleagues would never see her the same way. The trust she had shattered over years could not be repaired in a single act of contrition. My revenge was not cruelty, it was consequence. Spring came to Vienna, soft and pale, sunlight glinting off the Danube. I walked along the riverbanks, my children in tow, holding their small hands, feeling the warmth of the season on my skin. Elizabeth followed, quiet, subdued, learning finally the weight of the choices she had made. In the evenings, I would sit at my study desk, reviewing the evidence I had gathered, the careful orchestration that had led to this moment. I allowed myself a private smile, not for anger, not for malice, but for justice meticulously executed. The last act came quietly, without fanfare, a public acknowledgement of her indiscretions, framed as a careful discussion on accountability in professional and personal life. She had no choice but to participate. The city, small and intertwined, whispered. Gossip spread, reputations faltered, and I remained steady, almost invisible in the middle of the storm I had orchestrated. I did not gloat. I did not flaunt. Revenge, I realized, is a quiet victory. It is measured, precise, and leaves no room for doubt. One night, months later, I found her sitting alone in the living room, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls, the children asleep, the apartment silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. "I understand now," she whispered, her voice thin, fragile. Yes," I said, calm, steady. "And now you know that choices have consequences." I watched her, knowing this was not triumph over hatred, but triumph over deception, over betrayal, over the years she had taken for granted. Vienna sprawled beyond the windows, fog curling around lampposts, the river glinting in the night. And in that quiet, perfect city, I felt the bitter sweetness of a long, slow-burn revenge finally reaching its conclusion. I had waited, I had planned, and at last, justice had arrived. Quiet, invisible, inevitable. And somewhere, in the silence of our apartment, Elizabeth finally understood.